The cemetery grass was still soft from last night's rain when Rachel Hall pressed her palm against the cold granite headstone. 2 weeks. It had only been 2 weeks since they'd lowered David into the Alberta earth, and already the world had moved on. The flowers from the funeral were wilting in their plastic wraps, and somewhere behind her, a groundskeeper was trimming hedges with mechanical efficiency. "Never go to the farm, Rachel. Promise me." David's voice echoed in her memory, not from some distant past, but from his hospital bed 3 days before the heart attack that killed him. His fingers had gripped hers with surprising strength for a dying man, his eyes urgent despite the morphine haze. She'd promised. Of course she had. In 24 years of marriage, David had asked for so little. But standing here now, staring at his name carved in stone, Rachel realized she'd never understood why. Why that farm, the one he'd fled at 18 and never mentioned except in fragments, inspired such intensity in her gentle husband. Her phone buzzed, a text from Natalie. "Mom, call me. It's important." Rachel ignored it. Everything felt important and meaningless simultaneously these days. She turned to leave, and that's when she saw the man in the dark suit approaching across the cemetery lawn. "Mrs. Hall?" He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of careful grooming that screamed attorney. "I'm Richard Peters. I've been trying to reach you. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "I'm not selling anything." He held out a business card. "I'm the executor of your husband's estate. There's something he left for you, something that couldn't be handled through standard channels." Peter's office was all dark wood and leather chairs, the kind of place that smelled like old money and secrets. He placed a small wooden box on the desk between them. "Your husband purchased a property in Alberta 3 years ago," Peters said, adjusting his glasses. "Maple Creek Farm. According to his instructions, you were to be informed of its existence only after his passing." Rachel stared at the box. "That's impossible. We didn't have that kind of money." The property was purchased through a complex series of transactions. Peters slid a folder across the desk. "The deed is now in your name. All taxes paid for the next 5 years. Maple Creek." The name tasted foreign on her tongue. "That was his family's farm. The place She stopped. "The place he forbade me to visit." Peters opened the box, revealing an antique brass key attached to a maple leaf keychain and a sealed envelope with her name in David's precise handwriting. "There's something else you should know." Peters lowered his voice. "The property has become quite valuable. Oil was discovered in the region about 18 months ago. Your husband declined multiple offers from energy companies." Rachel's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then I've left you too soon. I'm sorry. There's so much I should have told you but couldn't find the courage. The farm is yours now. Not the broken place of my childhood, but something I hope will give you freedom. I know I made you promise never to go there. I release you from that promise. In fact, I beg you to go. Just once. See what I've built for you before you decide its fate. On the desk in the main house, you'll find a laptop. Password. The night we met, your maiden name. No spaces. I love you, Rach, more than I ever found the words to say." David Rachel clutched the letter to her chest, tears blurring her vision. Even from beyond the grave, David was full of surprises. "Mrs. Hall," Peters continued gently, "I should warn you. David's brothers have filed legal objections. They claim he wasn't mentally competent when he repurchased the family property. That's absurd. David was the most rational person I've ever known. Nevertheless, given the property's value, this could become complicated." Rachel's phone rang. Natalie. This time she answered. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about Dad's farm?" Her daughter's voice was tight with anger. "His brothers just called me. They said you're trying to keep family property from us." "His brothers?" Rachel's grip tightened on the phone. "Nat, I just found out myself. Don't talk to them. Don't agree to anything. They're family, Mom. They said Dad had issues with them, but people change. They want to help us understand what we've inherited." "Natalie, I have to go. We'll talk later." The line went dead. Peters was watching her carefully. The brothers work fast. Rachel stood, tucking the key into her pocket. "I need to see this place. Today." 48 hours later, after hastily booked flights and a 3-hour drive through autumn-painted Alberta countryside, Rachel found herself staring at imposing wooden gates marked Maple Creek Farm in wrought iron. Beyond them stretched a property far larger and more impressive than she'd imagined. Rolling hills dotted with maples turning gold and crimson, pristine white fences, and in the distance, a large farmhouse that looked nothing like the broken-down shack David had occasionally mentioned. This was an estate. The key turned smoothly in the gate's lock. As her rental car crunched up the gravel driveway, Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. What secrets had David kept here? What part of himself had he hidden for all these years? The farmhouse was stunning. A 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and large windows that caught the late afternoon sun. Fresh paint, new roof, landscaping that spoke of recent care. Nothing about it suggested pain or abandonment. Rachel's hands shook as she inserted the key into the front door. The lock clicked. The door swung open. She stepped inside and gasped. The entryway opened into a soaring great room with exposed beams and a stone fireplace. But it wasn't the architecture that stole her breath. It was the horses. Not real ones, but everywhere she looked. Exquisite oil paintings of horses in full gallop across endless fields. Detailed bronze sculptures capturing their power and grace. Photographs of magnificent breeds framed in simple black frames. Her lifelong passion, the one secret indulgence she'd nursed since childhood but rarely spoke of, surrounded her in a gallery dedicated to her greatest unspoken love. And there, on a desk by the window overlooking endless pastures, sat a silver laptop with a single red rose laid across its closed lid. Rachel moved toward it in a daze, her fingers trailing along the back of a leather chair. How had David known? She'd mentioned horses maybe twice in their marriage, always in passing. She'd thought it was a childish dream she'd outgrown. But he'd seen. Somehow, he'd seen. Before she could open the laptop, the crunch of tires on gravel announced another arrival. Through the front window, Rachel watched a black SUV pull up behind her rental car. 3 men emerged, all bearing unmistakable family resemblance to David. Tall frames, dark hair, strong jawlines. The Thompson brothers had arrived, and from their grim expressions they hadn't come to welcome the widow to Canada. Rachel quickly locked the front door, her heart racing. Through the side window, she watched them confer among themselves before the oldest, a silver-haired version of David with harder eyes, rapped sharply on the door. "Mrs. Hall, we know you're in there. We should talk." His voice carried the same Canadian accent that had softened David's speech when he was tired or upset. She remained silent, backing away from the door. David's vague warnings about his family echoed in her mind. Now, faced with their unexpected arrival, instinct told her to be cautious. The knocking came again, more insistent. Ignoring them, Rachel moved to the laptop and entered the password. October 1998, Parker. The night they'd met at the university mixer. Her maiden name. The screen came to life immediately, opening to a folder labeled For Rachel. Inside were 12 video files, each named with a month, December through November. With trembling fingers, she clicked the first one. David's face filled the screen. Not the thin, pale version from his final months, but healthy, vibrant, clearly recorded some time ago. He smiled directly into the camera, that crooked grin that had always made her heart skip. "Hello, Rach. If you're watching this, then I'm gone and you found the farm despite my years of making you promise not to." He chuckled softly and Rachel's throat tightened. "I should have known you wouldn't be able to resist. I recorded these messages over 6 months, one for each month of your first year without me. Not to control your grief, but to explain what I couldn't say while alive." The knocking outside had stopped. Through the window, Rachel could see the men returning to their vehicle, retrieving documents, conferring with stern expressions. David continued, his expression growing serious. "Starting with why I bought this place I swore I'd never return to. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart condition I inherited from my father. The doctors gave me 2 to 5 years. Rachel's breath caught. 3 years. He'd known for 3 years and never said a word. I chose not to tell you or Natalie. David looked down briefly, then back at the camera with determination. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want our final years overshadowed by death. I wanted to live fully with you until the end, not slowly die in front of you. Anger surged through her shock. He'd hidden his diagnosis, made medical decisions without her, denied her the chance to prepare. I know you're angry right now, David said, as if reading her thoughts across time. You have every right to be. But I hope you'll understand that I made this choice out of love, not deception. Rachel paused the video, overwhelmed. She needed a moment to process, to breathe. A knock on the back door made her jump. She turned to find a weathered man in his early 60s standing on the back porch, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. He pointed to the door and mouthed something. Cautiously, Rachel cracked it open. Mrs. Hall? I'm Frank Morrison. Your husband hired me to manage the stables. His voice was gentle, his eyes kind. I saw the SUV and figured you might want to know who's here. His brothers. Frank nodded grimly. Thought so. They've been circling since the oil was discovered. David warned me they might show up after... He trailed off. After he died, Rachel finished. Yes, ma'am. Frank shifted his weight. Look, I don't want to intrude, but if you need anything, if they try to pressure you, I'm here. David made me promise to look after this place. And you. Rachel studied him. David had trusted this man. That had to count for something. The horses, she said. He mentioned horses in the video. Frank's weathered face broke into a gentle smile. 6 of them. Finest animals I've ever cared for. Would you like to see them? The stables were immaculate. Spotless stalls, organized tack room, the smell of fresh hay and leather. And the horses. Rachel had never seen anything so beautiful. A gray Andalusian, a dappled Frisian, 2 quarter horses, a thoroughbred, and a gentle Appaloosa that nickered softly when Rachel approached. That's Midnight, Frank said, gesturing to the Frisian. The black one there. Your husband spent months tracking him down specifically. Said he reminded him of a painting you loved. Rachel's eyes widened. The Stubbs painting. 20 years ago at the Art Institute, she'd stood mesmerized before that image of a black horse against a stormy sky. David had waited patiently for 30 minutes while she studied every brushstroke. He'd remembered. Did he... Rachel hesitated, unsure how to frame the question. Did my husband ever mention his health to you? A shadow crossed Frank's face. Not directly, ma'am, but these last 6 months he pushed harder, worked longer hours, added more features to the property, like a man racing against a clock only he could see. The confirmation stung, but it also explained the driven quality she'd sensed in David during his final months. She'd attributed it to work stress, never imagining he was creating all this while knowing his time was limited. His brothers were here yesterday? Rachel asked. At the gate. Didn't let them in. Frank secured a stall door. But ma'am, I should tell you, they're not going to give up easy. When money's involved, people show their true colors. Rachel returned to the house as dusk began to paint the sky purple and gold. The SUV was still there, but the men had moved to sit on the porch steps, clearly settling in for a wait. She had 2 choices, hide inside like a frightened animal or face them. David would have wanted her to be smart, not scared. Rachel opened the front door. The 3 men stood immediately. Up close, the family resemblance was even more striking and more painful. It was like seeing versions of David aged differently by life's varied cruelties and kindnesses. Mrs. Hall. The oldest stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Marcus Thompson. These are my brothers, Thomas and Vincent. We apologize for the unexpected visit. Rachel didn't take his hand. You've been calling my daughter. We wanted to introduce ourselves to family. Marcus lowered his hand, unfazed. David was our brother. That makes Natalie our niece. Surely you can understand wanting to connect. After 30 years of silence? A silence David maintained, Thomas interjected smoothly. He had a lawyer's precision to his words. Not us. We tried to reach out over the years. He refused all contact. Rachel studied them, trying to reconcile these seemingly reasonable men with the villains of David's warnings. What do you want? To talk. Marcus's voice held what sounded like genuine emotion. About the farm, about David, about how we can resolve this situation as family, not through courts. Your lawyer's already filed papers claiming my husband was mentally incompetent. A protective measure. Thomas pulled a folder from under his arm. We had to ensure the property wasn't sold before we could discuss things properly. But Mrs. Hall, Rachel, we're not here to take anything from you. We're here because this is Thompson family land, and we believe it should benefit all of us, including you and Natalie. Vincent, who'd remained silent until now, spoke quietly. May we come in, please? Just to talk. No lawyers, no legal threats. Just family. Something in his tone, a weariness, a sadness, made Rachel hesitate. These men looked tired, aged, mourning perhaps in their own way. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. They sat in the great room, the horse paintings bearing witness to this strange family reunion. Rachel took the armchair facing them, maintaining physical distance even as she opened the possibility of dialogue. David never told me much about his childhood here, Rachel began. Just that it was difficult, that he left and never looked back. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. It was difficult, for all of us. Our father was not a kind man. But David was the youngest, Thomas added. The one Dad fixated on. The favorite, in his twisted way. It created tension between us, teenage boys being stupid and cruel. We said things we shouldn't have, Vincent admitted, looking down at his hands. Did things we're not proud of. Brothers fight. We fought harder than most. Rachel wanted to interrupt, to defend David, but something made her listen. When Dad got sick, Marcus continued, David was away at college. There were financial issues. The farm was failing, debts piling up. Dad needed to make arrangements. He had David sign some papers during a visit home, standard estate planning stuff, or so David thought. Thomas opened his folder, removing several documents. Later, when Dad died and we were settling the estate, those papers made it look like David had authorized transfers from Dad's accounts. Technically legal, but it cleaned out everything meant to be split between the four of us. You're saying David stole from you? Rachel's voice hardened. We're saying there was a misunderstanding that David interpreted as betrayal by us, Marcus said carefully. He thought we'd forged his signature. We thought he'd conspired with Dad to cut us out. Nobody would listen to anyone else. David left, changed his name from Thompson to Hall, and cut all ties. Rachel looked at the documents. They appeared legitimate, dated 1995, bearing what looked like David's signature, detailing financial transactions that would indeed appear suspicious. And you're telling me this because... Because we've had 30 years to think about it, Vincent said quietly. And when we heard David died, that he'd bought back this farm and left it to you, all those old wounds reopened. But Rachel, we don't want to fight. We want to find a way forward that honors David's memory and takes care of everyone. Marcus pulled out another document. Not a legal filing, but photographs. Old pictures of 4 boys in front of this very farmhouse. The youngest was unmistakably David, maybe 12 years old, grinning widely as his brothers roughhoused around him. We weren't always enemies, Marcus said softly. Once upon a time, we were just brothers. Rachel took the photos, her throat tight. David had never shown her pictures from his childhood. She'd assumed there were none worth keeping. I need time, she said finally, to think, to understand what David wanted. Of course. Marcus stood, his brothers following suit. But Rachel, before we go, you should know something. The property is worth millions because of the oil. We could fight you in court. We could make this ugly. But that's not what we want. He placed an envelope on the coffee table. That's our proposal, a fair division that ensures everyone benefits. Read it when you're ready. No pressure, no deadline. Just consider that maybe David's version of events wasn't the only version. People are more complicated than our stories about them. After they left, Rachel sat in the dimming light of the great room, surrounded by horses and secrets, holding photographs of a David she'd never known, a boy with brothers he'd claimed to hate, all of them smiling. Her phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Mom, please call me." Uncle Marcus explained everything. "We need to talk." Uncle Marcus. They'd known each other less than a day, and already her daughter was using family terms. Rachel returned to the laptop, opening the second folder she'd noticed earlier. Resources. Inside wasn't a master plan, but tools. Geological surveys from 3 different companies, their results similar but not identical. Legal documents about the farm purchase. Contact information for lawyers and oil companies. And a single document titled, "What I Know About My Brother's Doc." She opened it. Rach, if you're reading this, you've met Marcus, Thomas, and Vincent. And you're probably confused because they seem reasonable, maybe even nice. That's because they might be. I don't know anymore. I've spent 30 years believing my brothers betrayed me. But what if I was wrong? What if Dad manipulated all of us? I've tried to plan for every contingency, but I can't plan for this. The possibility that I was the villain of my own story. So here's what I know for certain. My brothers wanted this farm when it was worthless. Now that it's valuable, they'll want it more. Whether their intentions are pure or predatory, I can't say. What I can say is this. You're smarter than me, Rach. You're braver. You'll see clearly what I couldn't. Trust yourself. Not my fears, not their promises. Yourself. I've given you tools, not a blueprint. The rest is up to you. David Rachel stared at the screen, a cold realization settling over her. David hadn't left her a master plan. He'd left her an impossible choice. And somewhere in the darkness outside, the Thompson brothers were waiting to see what she'd decide. Her phone rang. Not Natalie this time. Richard Peters, her lawyer. "Mrs. Hall, we have a situation. The RCMP just called. The Thompson brothers filed for an emergency inspection of the property. They have a judge's order. Officers are on their way to the farm now." Rachel looked out the window. In the distance, she could see headlights approaching on the long driveway. Not one vehicle, but 2. The battle for Maple Creek Farm had officially begun. The RCMP cruiser arrived with the Thompson brothers close behind. Rachel watched from the window as a young constable emerged, flanked by Marcus, Thomas, and Vincent. She opened the door before they could knock. "Mrs. Hall, I'm Constable Wilson." The officer tipped his hat respectfully. "I understand there's a property dispute. These gentlemen have a court order requesting inspection as part of an ongoing estate matter." Rachel held out the blue folder Peters had given her. "Officer, I think you should review my documentation first. This property was legally purchased and transferred to me. I have the deed, notarized statements, and certified bank records." Thomas stepped forward. "Constable, family property disputes are complex. My sister-in-law is understandably emotional." "I'm neither emotional nor confused," Rachel interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm a widow, standing on property that legally belongs to me, facing 3 strangers who happen to share my late husband's DNA." Wilson took the folder, examining its contents carefully. The Thompson brothers exchanged glances, their confidence visibly wavering. After several minutes, the constable looked up. "These documents appear to be in order. Cleared deed transfer, proper notarization, certified purchase records." He turned to the brothers. "Gentlemen, I don't see grounds for forcing an inspection today. This is a matter for civil courts." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course, officer. We understand." As Wilson returned to his vehicle, Marcus lingered. "Rachel, may I speak with you? Alone? Just for 5 minutes." Thomas and Vincent retreated to their SUV. Rachel considered refusing, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes. They walked toward the paddock, maintaining careful distance. "I'm not the monster David made me out to be," Marcus said quietly. "And I think you're starting to realize that." Rachel said nothing, letting him fill the silence. "Look, I know how this appears. We show up the moment there's money involved. But Rachel, we tried to reconcile with David years ago. 4 years ago, to be exact. When our father died and we found—" He paused, struggling with emotion. "We found letters from Dad to his lawyer, bragging about how he'd played us against each other, how he'd manipulated the financial situation to make David think we'd betrayed him. And you expect me to believe you suddenly had this revelation?" I left David a voicemail explaining everything. He never called back, never acknowledged it. Marcus's frustration seemed genuine. I spent 3 years hoping he'd reach out. When I heard about the farm purchase, I thought maybe it was his way of coming home, of making peace. But he wouldn't see us, wouldn't answer calls. And now he's gone, and I'll never know if he believed me. Rachel studied his face, searching for deception. If what you're saying is true, why the legal action? Why threaten me? Because I'm afraid. The admission surprised her. Afraid that David spent his last years hating us for something we didn't do. Afraid that this farm represents that hatred made permanent. And yes, afraid that the oil money will disappear before we have a chance to prove we're not the villains of this story. Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang. Natalie. "Mom, I'm at the Calgary airport." "I'm coming to the farm." "Nat, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Uncle Marcus has been sending me photos. Photos of Dad as a kid, smiling with his brothers. Mom, what if Dad was wrong? What if he let pride destroy his family? And now we're doing the same thing." Rachel's stomach knotted. "Natalie, you can't just—" "I'm renting a car. I'll be there in 3 hours. Uncle Marcus offered to pick me up, but I said I'd drive myself. See? I'm being cautious. But Mom, we need to face this together." The line went dead. Marcus was watching her carefully. "She called you? You've been sending her photos?" "Pictures from our childhood. Nothing manipulative, just truth. She deserves to know her father had a family that loved him, even if he couldn't see it." Rachel wanted to argue, but the photos in her pocket felt heavy. Those smiling boys had been real once, before whatever poison had destroyed them. "I need you to leave now," Rachel said. "My daughter is coming. When she arrives, we'll all talk, but on my terms, in my timeline. Understood?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Understood. But Rachel, one more thing." He pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is our actual proposal. Not a legal document, just numbers. What we think is fair. You don't have to read it now, but when you're ready." He placed it on the fence post and walked away. Rachel spent the next 2 hours watching David's December video in full. He explained the farm purchase, his reasoning, his fears. But what struck her most was his uncertainty. "I might be wrong about them, Rach. God knows I've been wrong about other things. But I couldn't risk finding out after I'm gone and you're vulnerable." She was about to close the laptop when she noticed something odd. A second user account on the computer, password protected. She tried various combinations. Birthdays, anniversaries, their address. Nothing worked. Frank knocked on the door as twilight deepened. "Miss Hall, I'm heading home for the night. You need anything before I go?" "Frank, did David have another computer? Maybe something he kept locked up." Frank hesitated. "There was a laptop he kept in his truck. Brought it separately from this one. I figured it was work stuff, so I never asked." "Where is it now?" "Storage room off the master bedroom, I think. He asked me to put it in the safe up there about 6 months before he died." Rachel found it exactly where Frank described, a sleek black laptop in a small wall safe. No note, no instructions, just the computer. It was password protected, too. And unlike the first laptop, this one had security software that locked her out after 3 attempts. She called Peters. "The laptop might have critical information. Can you recommend someone who can crack it?" "I know a specialist in Calgary. Discreet, reliable. But Mrs. Hall, it'll take 48 hours, minimum. Do it, whatever it costs." Natalie arrived after dark, pulling up in a silver rental sedan. Rachel met her on the porch, and for a moment they just held each other, the first real embrace since David's funeral. "I'm sorry I hung up on you," Natalie said. I'm angry at Dad. For dying, for keeping secrets, for making everything so complicated." "I know, sweetheart. I am too." They went inside and Natalie stopped dead when she saw the horses. Oh my God, Dad did all this? Apparently he knew things about me I didn't think anyone noticed. Natalie wandered through the great room, touching the sculptures, studying the paintings. Mom, I've been thinking, what if the uncles are telling the truth? What if Dad's pride kept him from family who actually loved him? Or what if their sudden kindness is strategic? Rachel countered gently. We can't know people's hearts, Nat. We can only watch their actions. Then let's watch them. Together. Natalie pulled out her phone. I told Uncle Marcus I'd call when I arrived. Let them come here, let's hear them out properly, and decide based on what they do, not what Dad's ghost tells us to believe. Rachel wanted to refuse, to protect her daughter from potential manipulation. But Natalie was 27, not a child. And maybe, Rachel's own uncertainty was a sign that David's fears weren't the only truth available. Okay, she said, tomorrow, here. But just talk, no legal discussions. Natalie made the call, and Rachel heard Marcus's voice. Relieved, grateful, hopeful. That night, mother and daughter shared the guest room, neither wanting to be alone. As they lay in darkness, Natalie spoke softly. Dad used to tell me I overthought everything, that I should trust my gut more. He was right. You're brilliant, but sometimes you analyze yourself into paralysis. What's your gut telling you about his brothers? Rachel considered. That they're complicated, that nobody in this situation is entirely honest or entirely lying, that the truth is probably messy and painful for everyone. That's not your gut, Mom. That's your teacher brain giving a balanced answer. Rachel smiled in the darkness. My gut says, I want to believe them, and that scares me. The brothers arrived at 10 the next morning, bringing coffee and pastries, a peace offering that felt both genuine and calculated. They sat around the dining table, the 6 of them, awkward as strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance. Thomas spoke first. Before anything else, I want to apologize. The legal filing was premature and aggressive. We panicked when we heard about the oil. We're not proud of it, Vincent added, but that's the truth. We thought history was repeating itself, David getting everything while we got nothing. Tell me about the financial situation when your father died, Rachel said. The real story. Marcus exhaled slowly. Dad was broke. Alcoholic, gambler, terrible with money. The farm was mortgaged to the ceiling. When he got sick, he sold it to our Uncle Reginald for cheap, just to have cash for treatment. David wasn't involved in that sale? No, he was already gone, living in Minnesota under the name Hall. We didn't even know where he was. Thomas pulled out more documents. Uncle Reg owned it for about 10 years, then got cancer himself. That's when David bought it from him. At a reduced price, Vincent said carefully. Reg was desperate for cash. David paid maybe 30% of market value. So you think David exploited your uncle? Natalie asked sharply. We don't know, Marcus admitted. That's the problem. We don't know David's side because he wouldn't talk to us. Maybe Reg offered him a deal because they were close. Maybe David saw an opportunity and took it. We just don't know. Rachel's phone rang. Peters, the lawyer. Mrs. Hall, the specialist cracked the laptop. You need to see what's on it immediately. I'm sending you secure access now. Her laptop pinged with an email. Rachel opened it, pulling up the secured files while the brothers watched nervously. What is that? Thomas asked. David's second computer, the one he kept locked. The files appeared. Journal entries, audio recordings, and one video labeled, If Rachel Doubts Everything. Rachel's hand hovered over the video. This was it. Whatever David had hidden, whatever final truth he'd left. She clicked play. David appeared on screen looking gaunt. This was recorded near the end. Rach, if you're watching this, my brothers probably contacted you and they seemed reasonable, maybe even kind. That's because they might be. Marcus leaned forward, shock clear on his face. 4 years ago, Marcus called. Left a voicemail about finding Dad's letters, about realizing we'd all been manipulated. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to. But I was already dying, already scared. And I thought, What if this is another manipulation? What if I let them close and they destroy you after I'm gone? David's voice cracked. So I bought the farm, built this place, created insurance against a threat that might not even exist. Tears streamed down his face. I might be the villain here, Rach. I might be the one keeping a family broken out of cowardice disguised as protection. The room was silent except for David's recorded voice. But I loved you too much to gamble with your safety, even if it meant dying with regret. Even if it meant my brothers were telling the truth, and I was too proud, too afraid, to find out. The video ended. Marcus was crying openly. He got my message. He heard me, and he still couldn't trust us. Can you blame him? Natalie said, her voice hard. After what your father did? No, Vincent said quietly. We can't blame him at all. Rachel opened the audio files. The first was dated 4 years earlier, Marcus's voicemail to David. David, it's Marcus. Dad died last month. Going through his papers, I found letters. Letters bragging about how he'd kept his boys competitive, how he'd manipulated the financial situation. Jesus, David, we were puppets. All of us. I'm so sorry. Please call me back. The desperation in Marcus's voice was unmistakable. The second audio was more recent, just 2 years ago. Reginald Thompson, their uncle, speaking to David. David, your brothers didn't steal from you. Your father lied to all of you about what happened with those documents. Marcus showed me the letters from your dad. He's telling the truth, son. David's voice. Why would Dad do that? Because he was cruel, damaged, thought love meant ownership and control. I sold you this farm cheap because I wanted you to have it, David. Not to spite your brothers, but because you're the one who could heal here. And maybe you could heal what your father broke. Rachel looked at the brothers. Your father manipulated all of you. You weren't lying. Neither was David. You were all victims. But David knew, Thomas said, pointing at the computer. He knew I was telling the truth, and he still shut us out. Because he was dying, Natalie said suddenly, and terrified. Can you imagine? Being sick, knowing you're leaving your family vulnerable, having to decide if your brothers are genuine or con artists. What would you have done? The question hung in the air. Marcus wiped his eyes. I would have done exactly what David did. Protected my family at all costs. He looked at Rachel. We're not here to take the farm from you. We never were. We just wanted our brother back, and now he's gone, and we'll never have that chance. Vincent spoke, voice thick with emotion. Can we at least know him through you? Through Natalie? We've lost 30 years. Can we not lose everything? Rachel stood, walking to the window. Outside, the horses grazed peacefully in their paddocks. David had built this sanctuary out of fear and love in equal measure. She turned back to the brothers. I don't know if I can trust you, but I know David died not knowing if he could trust you either. And that regret is in every video, every letter, every choice he made. So what do we do? Natalie asked. We try, Rachel said simply. We try to do what David couldn't. Take the risk, build the bridge, and if it fails, at least we'll know we were braver than our fear. Marcus stood. What does that mean practically? Rachel took a deep breath. It means you tell me everything about David's childhood, the good and the bad. It means we spend time together, slowly, carefully, building whatever trust we can. And when I'm ready, if I'm ready, we'll talk about the farm and the oil and what's fair. No lawyers? Thomas asked. No lawyers. Not yet. First, we see if we're family or just people who share DNA. The brothers exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. There's one more thing, Vincent said. Something you should know before we go any further. He pulled out a letter. This arrived at my office last week, from Saskatoon. It's from someone named Reginald Thompson, Jr., Uncle Reg's son. He says he heard about the farm situation and wants to meet us. He says, Vincent continued quietly, that before Uncle Reg died, he told him about a fourth brother, someone our father had with another woman and kept secret from all of us. Rachel stared at him. David has another brother? We have another brother, Marcus corrected. And apparently he'd like to know his family. Natalie laughed, a shocked, slightly hysterical sound. This family just keeps getting more complicated. Actually, Rachel said, thinking of David's words in his video, maybe it just keeps getting more honest. 3 days later, Reginald Thompson Jr., call me Reggie, arrived at Maple Creek Farm in a modest pickup truck, looking as nervous as Rachel felt. He was 58, stocky, with kind eyes and David's jawline. A stranger who was somehow family. Marcus, Thomas, Vincent, Rachel, and Natalie waited on the porch like an awkward receiving line. Frank hovered near the stables, respectful of family business, but ready if needed. I don't know what to say, Reggie began, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. My dad told me on his deathbed that I had half-brothers. I thought about reaching out for years, but I didn't want to intrude on your lives. You're not intruding, Marcus said, descending the steps. Your family we didn't know we had. Come inside. They gathered in the great room, 5 children of a man who'd specialized in secrecy and manipulation, plus Rachel and Natalie, trying to piece together a fractured family tree. Reggie explained his history. His mother had been Elder Thompson's mistress for over 20 years. Dad would visit us once a month, said his other family didn't know about us. Mom thought it was romantic somehow, being his secret. I just thought it was sad. Did he... Vincent hesitated. Did he treat you well? Better than he treated you guys, from what I've gathered. Reggie's expression was apologetic. No financial manipulation, no emotional games, but that's probably because I didn't matter enough to control. You 4 were his legacy. I was just his mistake. You're not a mistake, Natalie said firmly. None of us are responsible for what that man did. Thomas leaned back, processing. So Dad had 4 sons with his wife, and at least 1 with another woman. Any other siblings we should know about? Not that I know of, Reggie said. But with him, who knows? The comment hung in the air. Then Marcus started laughing, a genuine releasing sound. The others joined in, the absurdity of their situation breaking through the tension. We're a disaster, Marcus said, wiping his eyes. An absolute disaster of a family. But we're here, Rachel said quietly. That counts for something. They spent the afternoon sharing stories. Reggie's memories of Elder Thompson, the brothers' fragmented childhood recollections, Rachel's years with David. A mosaic of one complicated man's impact on multiple lives. As sunset painted the windows gold, Natalie asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What happens now, with the farm? Rachel stood, moving to the window. She'd spent 3 nights wrestling with this decision, watching David's remaining videos, praying for clarity. The farm is legally mine, she began. The oil rights, too. David made sure of that. The brothers tensed, preparing for rejection. But he built this place out of fear, out of the belief that you were threats to be defended against. She turned to face them. I won't maintain that fortress. I can't. Marcus started to speak, but she held up a hand. I'm proposing a family trust. 50% stays mine. For maintenance, for my art studio David built, for the horses. The other 50% gets divided equally among Natalie, Marcus, Thomas, Vincent, and Reggie. Rachel, that's... Thomas began. 10% each, she continued then. But here's the condition. All decisions about land use require unanimous consent. We either trust each other or we don't. David couldn't take that risk. I will. Natalie stood abruptly. Mom, that's giving away millions. What if they don't? Rachel's voice was gentle. What if your father spent his last years building walls when he could have been building bridges? I won't make the same mistake. Reggie shook his head, stunned. Ma'am, I just met you. You don't owe me anything. This isn't about owing. It's about choosing what kind of family we want to be. Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. I can't accept that, Rachel. It's too generous. You're David's widow. You deserve security. Then propose something different, Rachel challenged. What feels right to you? The brothers conferred quietly. Finally, Thomas spoke in his lawyer voice, but softer than before. 70% to you and Natalie, 20% to us and Reggie, plus a foundation in David's name. A foundation? Natalie asked. For families in conflict, Vincent explained. Mediation, therapy, reconciliation work. Our father's legacy was division. Let David's be connection. Rachel felt tears sting her eyes. He would have loved that. And, Marcus added, you retain veto power. If we ever do anything to threaten you or Natalie, you can revoke our share completely. It'll be in the trust documents. We're asking you to trust us, but we're not asking you to be stupid about it. Rachel looked at Natalie, who was crying openly. What do you think, sweetheart? I think Dad would be proud of you. Natalie wiped her eyes. And maybe he'd be proud he was wrong about them too. The next morning, Frank found Rachel in the stables. Mrs. Hall, there's something I should have shown you weeks ago. David made me promise to wait until you'd made a decision about the property. He led her to the old barn, the one structure that hadn't been renovated. Inside, behind stacked hay bales, was a hidden door. Your husband's private space, Frank said, producing a key. The room beyond took Rachel's breath away. Not a war room with evidence files, but an artist's studio. Dozens of canvases lined the walls, all paintings of Rachel. Rachel reading, Rachel laughing, Rachel sleeping. Studies of her hands, her profile, her expressions. David had been an artist, too. In the corner sat an unfinished portrait. Rachel and Natalie together, painted from a photo taken at Natalie's college graduation. David had captured something ineffable, the love between them, the separate strength they each carried. A note was tacked to the easel. For Rachel to complete. I started it. You finish it, like everything else. She stood there for a long time, surrounded by her husband's secret passion, his private devotion made visible. That evening, she invited the brothers and their families to see it. Marcus brought his teenage daughters. Vincent came with his wife and young son. Thomas arrived alone, divorced, he explained, but trying to rebuild that bridge, too. The children ran through the farm while adults stood in David's studio, bearing witness to love expressed through art. I never knew he painted, Marcus said, studying a canvas. Dad used to mock him for drawing, called it weak, feminine. So David hid it, Rachel realized, like everything else he loved. Not anymore, Natalie said, touching the unfinished portrait. Mom, you should finish this. Hang it in the house where everyone can see it. December arrived with fresh snow, and Rachel finally opened the last video, the 12th one, saved for a year after David's death. He appeared on screen, so thin now that it hurt to look at him. This was recorded near the very end. Hello, my love. If you've made it here, you've survived your first year without me. Rachel pressed pause, steadying herself, then continued. By now you know I didn't have all the answers. I tried to protect you, but maybe I just created different problems. There's something I only understood in these final weeks. He paused, struggling with emotion. I was angry at my brothers for 30 years. Carried that anger like armor. And you know what it protected me from? Not betrayal. From forgiveness. From the possibility that people are more complicated than our stories about them. Rachel's tears fell freely. Rach, I built you a farm, but what I really wanted to give you was freedom, including freedom from my unfinished business. If my brothers reached out, I hope you gave them a chance. Not for their sake, but for yours. Because carrying someone else's grudge is a prison. His smile was gentle despite the pain visible in his eyes. And if they proved to be exactly as terrible as I feared, well, at least you know. At least you tried. That's all we can do. Try. Fail. Try again. He leaned closer to the camera. Paint something beautiful on that empty easel. And maybe forgive me for not being as brave as you are. I love you, Rach. Until forever. The screen went dark. Rachel stood in her studio, the one David had built above ground, not the hidden one, teaching a painting class. Marcus's daughters were there, along with local kids and Vincent's son. On the walls hung both her paintings and David's, combined into a single gallery. Through the window, she watched Natalie riding midnight across the eastern pasture, Frank supervising from the fence. Thomas was visiting for the week, staying in the guest house, slowly learning to be around family again without suspicion. The oil extraction had begun, a small, sustainable operation. James Crawford's company had embraced Rachel's environmental restrictions, recognizing that the long-term goodwill was worth more than quick profits. The David Hall Reconciliation Foundation occupied offices in the renovated barn. They'd already helped 32 families navigate conflicts, offering mediation and therapy. Marcus served as board president, channeling his business acumen towards something that mattered. That evening, the extended family gathered for dinner, a tradition they'd established. Rachel and Natalie, the 3 Thompson brothers, Reggie and his wife, various children and grandchildren. 15 people around a table built for 8, squeezed together, laughing, arguing, connecting. Before the meal, Marcus raised his glass. To David, who gave us this second chance even though he couldn't take it himself. To David, they echoed. After everyone left, Rachel returned to the hidden studio. She'd been working on the unfinished portrait, adding detail by detail. Tonight, she added the final touches, a background showing Maple Creek Farm at sunset, horses in distant paddocks, and in the shadows, barely visible, the figure of a man watching over them. Not a ghost, a guardian, a reminder that love persists even when presence doesn't. She stepped back, examining the completed work. It wasn't perfect. Her technique couldn't match David's precision. But it was honest, real, a continuation of what he'd started. Rachel thought about the forbidden farm that had become hallowed ground, not because the transformation was complete, but because they'd chosen to try. She thought about David's final words. Try, fail, try again. They were trying. Some days were harder than others. Marcus and Thomas still clashed occasionally. Natalie struggled with feeling caught between old loyalties and new connections. Rachel herself had moments of doubt, wondering if she'd been naive, if the brothers would eventually show their true colors. But most days they were just a family, imperfect, complicated, built on ruins and hope in equal measure. Rachel locked the studio and walked back to the main house under a sky brilliant with stars. Inside, Natalie had stayed behind, cleaning up, and they worked together in comfortable silence. "Mom," Natalie said finally, "do you think Dad would be happy with how things turned out?" Rachel considered. "I think he'd be terrified and proud and relieved all at once, like most parents watching their children make choices they wouldn't have made themselves." "Are we his children in this metaphor?" "We're all somebody's children," Rachel smiled. "Trying to do better than the generation before us, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not." They finished cleaning and stood on the porch, looking out over the property that had once been forbidden. "It's beautiful here," Natalie said softly. "Yes," Rachel agreed. "It is." And in that moment, with stars above and family behind them, it was enough. The farm stood as testament not to David's fears, but to Rachel's courage. Not to the divisions of the past, but to the possibilities of the future. The forbidden had become the cherished. The secret had become the celebrated. And love, complicated, imperfect, persistent love, had outlasted death itself.